One of the most common issues I see in my practice is leaking. Okay, so urinary incontinence is a fancy term for it. And today we're going to talk all about why this might be happening, the three different types of incontinence, because yes, there are different types, and what you might be able to do about it. Okay, so I just really want to preface this by saying if you're having experience leaking with coughing or sneezing or jumping or exercise, I don't care how old you are. I don't care how many kids you've had. This is never normal. It's just really, really common. And we've been passing it off as normal, especially like even the medical community passes it off as normal, and it's definitely not. Kegels might not always fix this. So if you're like, I'm still leaking and I've been doing a bazillion Kegels a day, there's probably a rhyme and reason to it. And we're going to get into all of that today. Prefacing this as well by saying this is not medical advice, it's for informational and educational purposes only. So let's dive right in. Okay, so really quick anatomy review. Remember the pelvic floor, it's kind of circular shaped. I don't have my model on me. Sorry. But what happens is your bladder sits in that floor. So then there's muscles under the bladder that help support it. And when they're not the most supportive, then the bladder, you could have some leaking. So when I say not the most supportive, I mean in two ways, okay? The way that we generally think of is a weakness issue. So that could definitely be the case. Or there actually could be a tightness issue, which means the muscles around the bladder are not able to relax. So it's giving the bladder an input, which might be contributing to your leaking. So I really wanted to get that out of the way first because it's not always a weakness issue. It could be a tightness issue. It could be a tightness issue on top of a weakness issue. And that's why it gets really confusing. And that's why seeing somebody like a pelvic floor physical therapist to help really tell what your issue might be is going to be super, super critical. So let's get into the types really quick. There's the first one, which is called stress incontinence. This is what we generally think of. This is generally a weakness issue. So your pelvic floor has a difficult time counteracting pressure, okay? Whether that be from something like a sneeze or a cough where your pelvic floor really needs to counteract that pressure moving through your abdomen and going down to the pelvic floor. It's just not strong enough to counteract that. Another thing is when you do things like exercise or jump, if you're holding your breath, you could be, your pelvic floor could be having pressure on it that way, and it's not strong enough to withstand that support. Or when you're doing things like jumping, your bladder is, for lack of a better term, unstable. So as your bladder is kind of like bouncing around in there, your pelvic floor needs to be able to counteract that pressure. So this is why we say stress incontinence is generally a weakness issue, but again, like everybody's different, so you never know. Then there's this idea of urge incontinence. So what this means is given that you're clear for any infection, UTI, STI, bladder infection, right? Everything comes back clear. You feel like you have to go to the bathroom very often. And when you go, not that much really comes out. So it's like, wow, I really had to pee, but why didn't my flow reflect how bad my urge to go was? Generally, this could be signs of a tight pelvic floor. So this is a condition where if you've been told to do Kegels, if it's like, oh, well, I can't make it to the bathroom because once feel like I have to go, I have to go. And people are like, oh, well, just do Kegels, and you've just been Kegeling your way through life. It could possibly exacerbate that urge sensation and make you feel like you have to go more. And that's the worst case. The best case is it's just not doing shit for you because you need to learn how to relax right now and not necessarily strengthen. And Kegels are a strengthening mechanism for the pelvic floor specifically. Then we have this little beauty called mixed incontinence, which is a mix of both symptoms. So that's where like the tight and weak pelvic floor scenario can come in. And those are the three different types. So again, not everybody is the same. Everybody's body is different. So let's get into some ways how we can mitigate right off the bat some of that if this is something you're experiencing. Some good bladder habits in general, okay? You want to stay hydrated. And I know this sounds scary because some people will be like, well, I'm already peeing myself, so I try to limit my water intake as much as I can. That's actually counterintuitive to what your goal is, which I'm assuming is stop leaking. So you want to stay hydrated. You want to make sure those muscles are getting appropriate nutrition and the circulation is good and they're performing optimally, because otherwise being dehydrated could potentially exacerbate those symptoms. So general rule of thumb, and this again is very like it depends on the person, it depends on your elevation, it depends on your activity level. But general rule of thumb is they say drink half of your body weight in ounces. So for example, if you weigh 200 pounds, you would aim to get 100 ounces of water into your system every day. But again, like that's very generalized. The other thing we're going to stop doing is Kegeling while you're peeing. This is never a good idea. If anybody tells you to do it, tell them to shut up, because this is not a good idea. Your pelvic floor muscles should actually be relaxing as you're voiding urine out of your bladder. And if you teach them to contract, which is what a Kegel is doing, your brain and your body are very smart. So they might form that connection where it's like, Mel is peeing right now, or she's trying to pee, so we have to contract. And this could contribute to tightness issues. It could contribute to difficulty totally emptying your bladder. And then we just don't want that. That just sets you up for a whole line of things potentially down the road. So just don't Kegel while you're peeing. It's never a good idea. Just in case peeing is something else you'd want to stay away from. This is the idea where like, I'm going out to the store, but I don't want to have to go to the bathroom. So I'm going to go pee just in case before I leave. Again, your brain and your body are very smart. Your brain will learn that signal. So anytime you gear to leave the house, or anytime you gear to do whatever activity you're getting set up to do, it's going to send you that signal that you have to pee, even if you don't have to go. So no, just stop. What else? I'm going off the fly here. The other thing is, if you do feel like you have an overactive pelvic floor or urge sensation, you want to try to do some deep breathing, do some calming, maybe close your eyes and do a couple deep breaths, belly breaths on the inhale with that one to calm everything down, and try not to get up right away. So I always say, like, if you have urge symptoms, sometimes it's like rewarding a temper tantrum for a toddler who is like screaming and you give them attention right away. Same thing goes with your bladder. Okay. So if it's giving you that false signal that you have to go, and if you don't go right now, then I'm going to make you leak. It's just like that temper tantrum toddler. So again, this is something that can be really scary. And a lot of people kind of are like, wait, you want me to drink water and not rush to the bathroom? And if you do have urge incontinence, these are two things that we would work on together if you were my client. But that's something to keep in mind as well. So definitely don't reward the temper tantrum toddler. Another way that you can have better bladder habits, make sure that when you're peeing, you're not what do they call it? I heard it the last week, power peeing. I love that term. So this is where you're forcing your pee to come out faster than it wants to. Like you're actively pushing. Again, we want our pelvic floor to be relaxed while you're peeing. So make sure you're relaxed. You're not forcing it out at a speed with which it doesn't want to come out of you. This is just a good tip overall. And another tip is try not to have your feet dangling, so like pointed. They say that it could potentially increase tension in the pelvic floor. So again, you want your feet to be on the floor if you can. If you don't reach the floor, you can try a squatty potty. You can put yoga blocks up so that your feet are on there. And this is also a good tip for pooping better too. So really just relaxing. And then my final good bladder tip is to avoid things. If you feel like you're having a lot of these and you are leaking, be mindful of bladder irritants that you might be consuming. You don't have to totally get rid of them, but just be mindful of what you're consuming, how much. And if it's like, well, I had 3 cups of coffee at 10 o'clock and then 10:30, I had to go through a full pad. that might be something to do with the coffee. So maybe you limit it to 2 cups, see if that works. Limit it to 1 cup, see if that works. Kind of like that type of thing. And again, if you have any questions, reaching out to a professional to help work on this with you, to give you some strategies that are specific towards you, is probably not a bad idea. So some of the bladder irritants, it's all the fun stuff, okay? I'm not happy about this list, but it's basically any fun food you could think of. So it's spicy food, it's chocolate, it's caffeinated beverages, coffee and tea, decaf and caffeinated, spicy food, citrus food, carbonated drinks, citrus, I don't know if I said that, and tomatoes, everything fun. Dairy is another one. Sugar is another one. Alcohol is another one. So, yeah, just be mindful of that if you are having some leaking, and maybe you can kind of move things around, maybe not consume so much, and see if that helps. And lastly, we're going to go over some ways to tell whether you have potentially a tight pelvic floor versus a weak pelvic floor. Again, this is not medical advice. This is just general things, general rule of thumb that you could be aware of and see if you fall into any of these categories. So if you do find yourself in that tight pelvic floor category, this is where doing a bazillion kegels is not going to do you any good, probably. Potentially, like I said before, it might exacerbate things, but at the best, it's just not going to help you stop leaking. So these are some of the signs that you might have a tight pelvic floor. Clenching or gripping, and this could be anything from holding your breath to shrugging your shoulders to scrunching your jaw to clenching your butt. Like if you were told to squeeze your butt during everything because it helps you get a better butt, just stop, because that shit is just stupid. It's not true. What it does is it's not really working your glutes at all. If you're standing, your glutes are working to keep you upright. If they weren't, you'd be on the floor. But clenching is really putting a lot of pressure through your pelvic floor. So you want to just stop doing that. We talked about urge frequency. Constipation is another one, especially if you can't link it to things like meds that you might be on. Anti-anxiety meds generally contribute to constipation, and I'm sure there are others, some pain medications too. So if it's not a diet issue, if it's not a medication issue, it could potentially be a pelvic floor issue. Muscles are tight around the rectum, and it's just difficult to get the poop out. So that's another sign. Discomfort with any vaginal penetration, tampon use, gyno exams, sex, groin, butt, or back pain also might be a sign that you have a tight pelvic floor. You have a difficulty starting a urine stream, relaxing your pelvic floor in general, and you also feel like you can't really move without gripping, without holding your breath, without your pelvic floor kind of like sucking it all in. Those are just some general signs. And then signs of a weak pelvic floor, the stress incontinence, like we talked about before. So your pelvic floor just is not strong enough or doesn't have the endurance to counteract something like a sudden pressure change. You can easily relax, but you can't really perform a Kegel without compensating. So a lot of people will be like, oh, well, I do my Kegels and it'll be our first one-on-one session. And I go, okay, well, show me your Kegel. And their butt starts gripping. Their thighs start going together, like clenching. Their jaw clenches. Their shoulders come up. They're holding their breath. And if you're doing a Kegel properly, you should feel like your anus, from your anus to the area of where your clitoris is, all of that should pull up and in. So it's kind of like you're sucking up through a straw, and you should feel it through that whole area without anything else going on. It's just a pelvic floor contraction. Nothing else should be kicking in to compensate. Difficulty holding the contraction. So that's another thing. So ideally you want to be able to hold like it's called your maximum voluntary contraction. So as hard as you can without compensating, you want to be ideally able to hold that for 10 seconds. And this is what happens. Like we need that endurance as our bladder is filling or as our bladder is full and we're kind of scoping out a place to pee. We need that endurance for the muscles to support the bladder in those types of situations. So this is why that's totally, totally key. The finger test I'm not going to get into, but we do go over this in my course called Finally Floored. Doors are not open right now, actually, but I will be releasing that probably around like summer, fall 2021 again. That'll be the next course date. So if you're interested, please let me know. And then a queef with lifting anything. So basically, like you have a fart coming out of your vagina. This means that your pelvic floor muscles cannot hold that in or like withstand that pressure again, and it just kind of lets out. So that's what we got today. I hope that you got something from this. If you are experiencing any type of incontinence, please know that it's not age determinant. It's not determinant of what happened in your reproductive life, aka whether you've had kids or not. I see this in people as young as 14 and up. So I know it's something difficult to kind of like admit or like speak about with somebody or like seek help for, but know that there are those of us out there who do this for a living, and there is help for you beyond living in black leggings your whole life and wearing a diaper and having to get surgery. If you're being pushed to have a surgery and you haven't tried conservative measures like speaking with a pelvic floor physical therapist, I really suggest that you get a second opinion and you see a pelvic floor PT to kind of like see if you really need surgery, because surgery is not always warranted. Okay. Surgery usually puts a band-aid on a bigger issue. So if you were having something like a muscle compensation or something just isn't working optimally and you get that surgery, you never learned how to then use your body to help support the surgery. You know what I mean? So then if you're still using that compensation pattern, the surgery might not do anything for you. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you're in the United States, please know that there's something called direct access, which means that you can see a pelvic floor physical therapist for a certain number of time, depending on where you live. In New York, it's either 10 visits or 30 days without a script from your doctor. Connecticut, it's 6 visits or 30 days without a script. And it's really state dependent. And you can find that on Google. Just Google your state direct access laws physical therapy, and it will tell you. So I hope something resonated. Please share this video if you know somebody who is experiencing this and can use a little bit of encouragement and some basically a path instead of just grinning and bearing shit. Okay. Our lives are too short to be sitting there when there are much better options out there. So let me know if you have any questions. Please comment, please subscribe, and I will see you next time.